Hey guys, so this week we're going to talk a lot about potential. What, how I define potential, like what it is, why we all have it, what it means for us as athletes and people, how it limits us, and how to exceed it or not exceed it. And I'm going to have 5 proofs. So we're going to be looking at 5 different athletes. So we're going to be looking at, well, in 2 stages of their life. So we're going to be looking at Maxwell Henasby when he has been training for 4 months, and Maxwell Henasby at 5 years. We're going to look at Matt Jang from Hawaii Parkour. His channel is For the Love of the City at training. I'm not sure of the exact date, but I suspect under 6 months. And Matt Jang at about 4 to 4.5 years. Bob Reese at under a year training, and Bob Reese at 4 years training. Hainsy from Canberra at 8 months training, and at about 6 or 7 years training. Myself at about 5 months training. Myself at 4 years or a bit over 4 years training. And for a spicy bonus extra one, myself at 7 years. Basically, the argument I'm going to make is that we all have potential, and that potential for being good at parkour is not the same in all of us. And that if any person trains hard for about 4 to 5 years, what they basically do, which is not to discredit them, you do definitely have to train hard for 4 to 5 years, is you fulfill your inherent potential that you have when you start. And I would say that training parkour does not alter your potential, but it only fulfills it. So what I mean by that is if we have a starting point where we have our 5 different athletes who all start at the same point, this is day zero training, and then we have a graph of improvement. And most people's graph of improvement is pretty steep, and then it tapers out. And it's not like it doesn't improve after that, but the increase is very, very slow. So I think everyone gradually improves. If you keep training, you do continue to improve. But I think after 4 or 5 years, about here, you hit your peak in terms of most people get about as good at parkour as they're going to get after about 4 or 5 years. However, where this point is after 4 or 5 years is actually very different. So some people it's a bit lower, even lower, even lower, even lower in terms of just capability moving. And what I'm going to talk about is why people's potential is radically different, or why we all end up at very different points in our training, and why some people have a very high potential for movement and how that is fulfilled, and why some people have lower and lower and lower, and how those potentials limit us, and how it is possible, I believe, to exceed. So, if you've been traveling along this line of just slowly improving, I believe that it is impossible to radically increase again. That's a very dramatic radical, but similar to the initial growth, and why we do this plateau. So the simple way to look at this is to look at these athletes when they're moving, when they've just started. So everyone's at a very similar amount of time training, some a little bit more than others, but basically all beginners. I would argue that as beginners, these people that are going to become some of the best athletes in the world were already actually very good at moving. Because I don't know about you, but how many of you could do a kip up on a bar at 4 months? Or when you did a standing precision, you had, if we remember our Dylan Baker, Oleg Vorslov video, had incredible vertical chest angle. So if we look at the vertical chest angle concept we talked about, Maxwell Henasby is phenomenal. He was doing, for all intensive purposes, I mean, it's sloppy, he's a beginner, but for all intensive purposes, actually a phenomenal jump. So for him, even now, the vast majority of people can't achieve this degree of vertical chest angle in the jump. Like, after, however many years of training. So what I'm basically saying is that, the capacity, or the reason that these people have such high potential, is that they had it before they started parkour, and parkour training did not impact that in any way, really, beyond obviously working very hard for 4 or 5 years. We also have Maxwell at about, as a beginner, doing level rail capris. And I don't know about you or me, but I sure as shit wasn't doing level capris on rails, or doing, for what is all intensive purposes, like very explosive jumps with quite solid landings as well. And, look at the power and speed in that movement there. He's actually good, basically. Not many people I know now can ascend a wall with that much pop. Or, do a climb up as good as that. Or, level rail capris this casually. So, this is him 5 years later, and argue that what he has done is fulfilled his potential. So all of the characteristics of his movement are there. He's now just, spent 5 years honing his skills. And, what he liked doing then is what he likes doing now. He likes doing climb ups and running jumps and kip ups and all of the same kind of movements. It's just the same guy. Up next, we have Matt Jang. This is interesting because I think he's been training for very little time in this video. But I would argue that the principles for good movement still exist. Or the fundamentals for good movement are absolutely present already in what he is doing, and that his training just manifests those. So that was an elegant roll, a nice descent, and he was very fluid. All of this movement was very well done. It's very choppy because this is the nature of, people filming videos at this time in their life. Sick wall run. But quick observation here. He's actually, one, very smooth and elegant, and two, he's so buoyant and light on his feet. He's like incredibly fast, and he's getting, if you remember our previous videos, hip extension straight away, as in like the opening of the hip joint, what I talked about in the Pedro Salgado versus Maxwell Henasby video. He has it straight away. I don't know about you, but I certainly wasn't doing wall spins on vertical walls when I began. Not only that, it's quite smooth. His comfort in popping up off his arms and, doing cat leapy arm grabby movements and cash vault style things, like jumping upwards into it. It's like a big jump, and he's doing a great job of it. And it looks very relaxed for him. All of his movement has a natural elegance about it that, a lot of people don't have now after however many years of training. He also does what's essentially a reverse vault hyper, or very close to it. And it's smooth. Like, he executes the movement well. This is super annoying frame by frame of him doing. Look at the size of this jump. Like, let's just look at this. It's photos. I wish it was videos, but it's photos. This looks like it's over a gap, like 9 feet, maybe 10. Like, it's a really big jump. And this is him just like as he's beginning training, like he has this degree of confidence and competency. And then you see the manifestation of this, 4.5 years later, it's the same dude, like that elegance and ease in running. It's just now he's got 5 years of practice behind it. And it's the same kind of thing. It's just like he's way better at it now, but it's still him. It's still Matt Jang. And it was from the beginning, So up next, we have a very young, topless Bob Reese. This is him training for less than a year. I don't know the backgrounds of these people or what they did before, but a quick observation or point that I'd like to make is, one, he's just got like a lot of bulky chest muscle already, as in he's kind of shaped like a barrel, which is not that usual. His frame and his stature and the way he looks is unusual. He's very, he's a beginner, but he's very competent. Like, how many of you were doing dive fronts, or any of these things so in less than a year in your training? And like, you may say, oh, he's just a kid doing a backflip off a roof, but it's actually really well done. Like, as he chucks this, it's not just like a lazy, sloppy landing. He sticks it, and he sticks it nicely. Like, that's a solid landing. Like, he did a great job. And your generic rail flow stuff, except it's Bob Reese doing it, and he's crushing it. And lines like this, this is just like Bob Reese in a nutshell now. Like, this is what he's known for, is this kind of like arm supporty, flowy, straddle-legged nonsense. But this is what he was already like. He just didn't have any practice or experience in time. How many of you in less than a year training could hold like a bad flag? Probably not many. Or, had sick trampolining skills. So when we look at, Bob Reese now, what I would say is it's just the fulfillment of Bob Reese's potential. You've still got that same, barrel-chested monstrosity shape going on, except he's just bolt the hell out because he's gotten like, this is 3.5 years later or 3 years later, after he's been training for 4 years. Same style, still looks like him. Same type of movements. It's just he's had all that time to perfect them and practice being Bob Reese. And you can see that same, barrel shape we're talking about before. It's all of the principles that made him good are still there. We can see this here as just an extension of the trampolining skills that he was doing before, his ability to aggressively flip well and use his body well. So now that we've watched a spectacle of highly talented athletes, let's watch some people who I think had lower potential, which is not to discredit them as people, because I don't think this is really much to do with the person at all. I think this is just something that I don't think people are aware of. So this is Hainsy, 8 months into training. Now, I'd like to point out some movement things about him. One, he's getting astonishingly little hip extension, like astonishingly little. Like compared to Matt Yang, look at the angle here. It's a chest to this. He's in like aggressive hip flexion, and he never even gets close to getting out of that. You can tell by the incredibly small step sizes. His movements are not like fluid. They're not powerful like they're not fluid like Matt Yang's, or powerful like Maxwell Henasby. He doesn't have good control of rotation or anything. He doesn't look particularly fast or stable. He just looks like, most people look like when they start, which is just like mediocre. He's just a regular dude. And when you look at him moving in these clips, it's not like he's bad, and he has preferences. So if we look at what he likes doing, he likes arm jumps and cat leaps and kind of anything in that. Like it's not like people don't have strength. It's like what their strengths are, they tend to play to them. And if they aren't that good, as in the potential isn't that high, they still will basically be doing the same things, And Hainsy's video we're going to look at is after 6 or 7 years training. And I think if he trained for another 10 years, I don't think it would significantly differ. I don't think training parkour can change that. I think it just fulfills it. So here he is 6 or 7 years later, and it's still basically Hainsy in that if we look at things like his hip extension, it's rubbish. It still just looks like him. He's doing he's better. Obviously, he's better, and it's a credit to his hard work that he's improved and stuck with it, even if he didn't have what I would consider natural ability at all. And I know from his personal training history that he's worked incredibly hard on achieving what he has achieved, which is an absolute credit to him without all of the natural ability that people who train for a long time tend to have. But the movements that he's doing are still the same kind of movements, the same style of things, the same preferences, the same, he just looks like Hainsy still, as in he's still just doing the same things that Hainsy here was doing and moving in the same way that he was. It's just the potential of Hainsy fulfilled. And I think that if you don't have these things to begin with, you don't pick them up in parkour. You polish, but you fulfill. So now we're going to look at another athlete, I think, who doesn't have the best potential for movement. And this athlete is me. So we can see here in 2010, I'd been training for about 5 months at this point. And I'm in training quite vigorously for 5 months as well. Now, this jump isn't actually the worst jump, but it is certainly not a good jump. And especially as you can see, as I come into load on this landing, there is some really non-helpful things going on in terms of like, this dude is not very good at moving. You can really see that in things like the position of the head to chest and what's going on. There's no like Bob Reese barrel chest or excellent coordination of balance and movement. It's a very nose-led movement. There's not any real power or hip extension. In fact, it's just kind of awkward. The landing, as you'll see here, has a lot of undesirable elements going on it in terms of like what my legs are doing versus my feet angle. We've talked about this a bit, like where my knees are tracking relative to where my feet are going. The arms are awkward at best at all times. And as you can see, most landings have, a few things in common, which would be how close can I get my nose to the ground? So there's no like fluidity or elegance or grace or control or real coordination or power or any of the things. I mean, I'm halfway okay at jumping, I guess, but not really in many ways. So then we can see the manifestation of that. This is after 4 years of training. In the same way that, everyone else has had 4 years to train, I had 4 years. And all of the things that, characterize the movement are still there. The nose-led movement, the rounded chest, the relatively bad hip extension, the lack of balance and coordination, the real lack of power or fluidity or anything that would make, this person a redeemably good movement. In fact, it just looks very mediocre. You can see that the jump here has essentially remained basically unchanged after 4 years. Same basic awkwardness, same basically 90-degree bend in the arms, all the things that made the jumper was before. Still no large amount of power. This is look at this. This is a total fulfilling. This is one of the first level Capri's I ever did. Violent ankle thing, as you can see. Boom. Slow motion power. Yeah, that really hurt. And this is what I looked like. This is the result of my 4 years of training. I wish I had it before I started training, but it would just look exactly like this, but with less muscle. So basically, I just became a muscly me. And I think that's basically what happens when you train parkour is, you just get stronger where you know how to use muscles, as in like basically muscles that you know how to use grow. So I've got really developed traps. The shape of my spine is a fucking floppy banana. My weight would be smack bang on my heels. My shoulder blades are sticking way out of my body. I really have chronic pain in my shoulders at this point. And basically, like, the product of this body is, the same body that was here when I was young, and then the same body that when I was here. Is in, like, all I was doing was fulfilling the potential of my body. And I think that as a person, or as an individual moving, we just follow these graphs. We start at the same point, or at least we think we do. But in reality, we're not starting at the same point at all. We're starting from completely different points. And I don't think parkour changes, anything. So as we're looking at this, old version of my body here, we can see, I think the point that I'm trying to make is that it's possible to change your potential to be something other than what you're meant to, or to, exceed your potential, or to not be limited by the things you don't know how to do. And I think it's possible to do that. This is me 3 years later. The body has changed. It's a different body, basically. And I think that's, if you really want to be able to move in a fundamentally different way to produce different movement results, to, not be limited by your movement potential, I think you have to do some shit that no one else is doing. And I did not change the way I looked by training parkour. I was training parkour at the time, but that is not what made that happen. And I think the thing that allows you to be different, and if we look at, like, the movement results of this different body, we can see that while I am still in some ways similar, in other ways I'm actually a very different person, in terms of there's power where there was no power, there's balance where there wasn't balance, there's stability where there wasn't stability. There's a lot more things going on here than there were before, in terms of if we look at Hainsy's 4 years and Hainsy's 7 years, and he trained hard the whole time, I don't think there would be dramatic different. I think the improvement curve would be just a nice linear line, whereas I feel like I altered my potential, and I think that anyone has the capacity to alter their potential. So, for instance, if we look at this run up here, is what we can notice is that while I had no semblance of hip extension before, I now am starting to have it. The chest is in a very different position than what I was before, as while it is to some extent nose-led, it is much more chest-led than it was before. The movement is balanced. There's a lot more power than there ever was before, a lot more. And you can see really on that takeoff, like, I'm actually getting hip extension. And all of these things, I think, are learnable traits. I just think parkour is not really that great a way to learn them. I think, there's power in the arms here that didn't used to exist, as well as the ability to use them that didn't used to exist. And you can see that the movement results that it's producing are of a much higher quality than what was around before. You can see that there's actually playos happening in these playos, and, things that are actually working as a movement, which is not to say that I'm, like, spectacular, but, like, movement is actually functioning to some extent. And I think that anyone can alter their potential and improve the way they move if they first realize that it exists, and that we're all fitting onto this curve some way, and that we're all kind of living out, where we can get to. And that, I don't know, the video series that I'm going to talk about is really to talk about how, if you've been traveling along this, 7 years, 8 years, and you sound like you're not improving, but you're not getting much better, how to, start doing this again, how to actually start improving. I think realistically, uh, most people, in fact, basically everyone, can get to a pretty similar level. Obviously, I think, there are factors that are going to change the absolute creme de la creme, the top to the top, but I feel like basically everyone can get to a very high level of movement, and that the skills that you need to practice are not the skills that people emphasize at all. I don't think strength and conditioning, I don't think flexibility, I don't think training parkour, any of those things are going to do it. I think it has to be looking at a bunch of other factors, which we're going to get into, which include but are not limited to, how you stand, how you walk, and how you basically use your body every day. Because those are the things that, these athletes were doing before they started parkour that you didn't understand, know how to do. And I think that is where the attention needs to be. If you're not interested in any of this, if you're not interested in altering your potential, I think it's important to just stop stressing out about getting better at parkour then. Because I think, you're just going to be fulfilling that curve no matter what. So just relax and just let that gradual growth happen. If you do want to do something different, it's possible.